Caleb Martin didn't cry when the trucks came. He didn't yell. He didn't even flinch when the bulldozer's blade tore through the last row of sunflowers like they were weeds. Instead, he stood barefoot in the dirt, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat, as if memorizing every crack in the soil before it was buried for good. His grandfather had planted this land by hand. Every fence post, every irrigation pipe, every buzzing hive was a living memory stitched into the earth. Caleb grew up chasing chickens through rows of kale, learning to speak to bees before he learned to ride a bike. He knew every inch of this place, knew the exact patch where the soil turned sandy, and knew where the queen bees liked to nest, knew what it meant to care for something that couldn't speak but still gave life. The men in polos didn't care. They waved their clipboards, citing zoning codes and residential cohesion standards. They said the farmland was non-compliant, visually disruptive, and technically within the jurisdiction of the newly formed Homeowners Association, a technicality buried in paperwork, one Caleb hadn't seen coming. They offered him a payout, small and insulting. He refused. They fined him instead, daily, aggressively, then sued him for non-compliance. His legal fund dried up faster than his irrigation tanks during the drought. By the time the final notice came, the only things left standing on the land were a rusted shed, a single truck, and 15 beehives stacked neatly beneath the shade of a pecan tree. When they showed up with machinery, Caleb had already moved most of the bees. He wasn't about to let them bulldoze. The only thing that still listened to him, a man in a blue golf shirt, handed him an envelope, as if it were a favor. "It's just business," he said. Caleb opened the envelope, scanned the text, then looked up. "You ever been stung by 1,000 bees at once?" he asked. The man blinked. "Excuse me." Caleb smiled, slow and steady. "Just wondering if you'd recognize the sound they make before they do it." The man stepped back. "Threats will not a threat," Caleb said, folding the paper carefully. "Just a question." When the trucks finally drove off and the soil was flattened, Caleb climbed into his truck with the last box of bees humming softly beside him. He didn't look back. That night, he parked in a quiet lot a few miles away. He lifted the lid of the hive, just enough to let fresh air in. The bees inside were restless, sensing displacement. "Don't worry," Caleb murmured. "You're gonna love your new home." His fingers tapped the dashboard rhythmically as he stared through the windshield at the lights on the hill. There, perched above the ruined fields, was the sprawling HOA development. Cookie-cutter houses, lined in perfect rows, manicured lawns that would never know the feel of dirt under fingernails, and flat, wide rooftops that caught the moonlight just so. Wasted space. He sat there for a long time, thinking. Then he pulled out the HOA's architectural schematics, plans he had taken from the development office months ago when they first started sniffing around his land. Every building, every roof, every access point. The trucks had stolen his farm, but they hadn't taken his bees, and they sure as hell hadn't taken his fight. Caleb Martin knew every inch of his stolen land, but now he needed to learn the walls and roofs of the enemy's fortress. It was the kind of place designed to be invisible. Manicured lawns, pristine white fences, uniform houses that blurred together like a plastic model kit. The new Homeowners Association ruled here with subtle, relentless control, bylaws, fines, and community standards that kept the neighborhood sterile and obedient. Caleb couldn't afford lawyers anymore. Instead, he would play a different game. He cleaned up and showed up at the HOA office one bright Monday morning with a borrowed contractor's license and a fresh fake ID. He applied for the maintenance job The secretary barely glanced up. "We're short-handed," she said. "When can you start?" 2 days later, Caleb was inside. The job was simple. Fix leaks, replace light bulbs, patch drywall. But to Caleb, every task was a reconnaissance mission. He carried blueprints folded inside his work jacket, memorized security camera positions, and noted when the board held meetings. He listened behind doors, blending into the background like a shadow. At night, when the neighborhood slept, Caleb pored over the schematics he had copied. The roofs were the prize. Flat, broad expanses of unused space, perfect for something nobody imagined. He checked the keypad locks, counted the number of windows facing the street, and tested the timing of the security patrols. Every detail was a piece in the puzzle, but Caleb also kept a secret weapon: the bees. Hidden in a rented garage nearby, the hives buzzed softly, alive and waiting. He had moved them carefully, night by night, keeping them safe and fed, while watching the neighborhood from a distance. He watched neighbors tending their perfectly trimmed hedges, children playing in fenced yards, and board members in their power suits, blind to the storm, brewing right above their heads. One afternoon, while fixing a leaky pipe in the clubhouse basement, Caleb overheard a conversation through a cracked door. The HOA president and a developer were discussing expansion plans. "We need to tighten control. No more exceptions," the president said. Caleb's jaw clenched. "They think they own everything," he whispered to himself. That evening, he mapped out a new plan. If the ground was lost, the sky was still free. The rooftops could become his new farmland. A secret garden in plain sight. The bees would be his allies. Silent sentinels thriving where humans couldn't see. But first, he needed access. Caleb started small. Late at night, he scaled the fire escapes, carrying empty hive boxes and smoker cans. The first installation was on the roof of the HOA's main office. A hive disguised inside a maintenance panel. If anyone noticed, they would think it was part of the HVAC system. The hum of the bees was a defiant whisper in the quiet night weeks. By week, he added more hives, moving carefully, avoiding cameras and patrols. The bees spread like a hidden army, building combs, storing honey, and pollinating the few stubborn flowers the HOA allowed. One morning, a neighbor spotted Caleb on a ladder and called the HOA office. But when a security guard arrived, Caleb vanished into the shadows, leaving only a faint trail of honeycomb scraps. The HOA began rumors about weird noises on the roofs. Strange buzzing sounds carried on the wind. Some residents dismissed it as imagination. Others felt uneasy. Meanwhile, Caleb smiled behind his veil, knowing his army grew stronger every day. The stolen land was gone. But Caleb had found a way to fight back. Not with lawsuits, but with wings and honey. And the neighborhood's perfectly ordered world was about to be disrupted by a force they never expected. The night was thick with quiet, broken only by the soft hum of engines and distant crickets. Caleb Martin moved like a ghost across the roof of the HOA's main office building. A worn toolbox in one hand and a smoker tucked inside his jacket. The moonlight cast long shadows across the flat surface, but Caleb's eyes gleamed with purpose. Tonight, the first hive would awaken. He'd spent weeks preparing, scouting the best spots, checking for surveillance blind spots, and ensuring the bees would have access to nearby flowering plants in the HOA's decorative gardens. The bees were restless in their temporary shelter, their quiet buzzing a promise of what was to come. Caleb knelt carefully, lifting the maintenance panel on the rooftop HVAC unit. Inside, he placed a large wooden hive box, filled with fresh frames, and the unmistakable queen bee he'd bred himself. The bees inside the box stirred, sensing the change. He lit his smoker, a thin cloud of smoke drifting gently over the combs. To calm the colony, Caleb worked swiftly, but with reverence. This wasn't just maintenance. It was reclamation. The hive was sealed and hidden beneath the metal panels, invisible to the casual eye. Caleb stepped back, heart pounding, as the first buzz of life filled the rooftop air. His phone buzzed silently. A text from his contact in town. HOA meeting tomorrow. They're pushing new fines on unauthorized rooftop structures. Caleb's jaw tightened. The board was tightening their grip, but he was already 2 steps ahead. Over the next few days, Caleb returned under the cover of darkness, installing more hives, each hidden in plain sight behind vents, near satellite dishes, or tucked into planter boxes on balconies. The bees adapted quickly, their populations growing with the nectar the neighborhood unknowingly provided. But the real magic began when the first jars of honey were harvested. Caleb bottled the golden liquid and took it to the local farmers market, labeling it HOA Gold Reserve. A sly nod to the very people who stole his land. The honey was a sensation, sweet, floral, with hints of wildflowers and clover from the untouched corners of the community gardens. It sold out every weekend. Word spread fast. People who had never cared about local farms now craved this mysterious honey. Meanwhile, the HOA's board meetings grew tense. They debated how to respond to the rumors of rooftop bees, worried about allergies and liability. Flyers appeared warning residents against approaching unknown bee colonies. Caleb watched all of this unfold from the sidelines, knowing he'd planted a seed that was blossoming beyond his control. Then came the first sign that his bees were more than just a secret rebellion. The neighborhood's flowers, once wilted and sparse, bloomed vibrantly. The birds returned. Even the HOA's meticulously manicured lawns seemed healthier, greener. The residents noticed. They started asking questions, searching for the source of the sudden change. One afternoon, as Caleb checked a hive hidden on the roof of the community center, a gust of wind lifted his hat and a sharp-eyed neighbor spotted him. Her eyes widened in shock. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" she shouted. Caleb froze. For a heartbeat, the plan teetered on the edge of disaster. But then he smiled, a calm, steady smile that said, "I'm not your enemy. I'm the new beekeeper," he said simply, lowering his tools. The neighbor frowned, but didn't call security. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Well, the gardens look amazing." Word spread quickly after that. The mystery beekeeper was no longer invisible. Caleb had become a quiet legend, a ghost in the walls with an army of bees, and a mission that went far beyond honey. And somewhere deep inside, Caleb knew the real battle was only beginning. The HOA's monthly board meeting was supposed to be routine, budget approvals, landscaping contracts, parking rules. Instead, it buzzed with an unexpected topic, the mysterious rooftop honey. Caleb sat quietly in the back, disguised in a polo shirt and jeans, blending in with the restless residents. The room smelled faintly of fresh pine cleaner and tension. At the center of the table, a small jar gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Where did this come from?" the HOA president demanded, holding up the jar labeled HOA Gold Reserve. No one answered. The jar was passed around, each member tasting a thin layer of honey on a plastic spoon. The room fell silent. "It's the best honey I've ever tasted," admitted Marla, the finance chairwoman, her voice grudging but honest. "Who's selling it?" another board member asked. Caleb's heart pounded. He could have spoken up, revealed himself as the beekeeper behind the jars, but the moment wasn't right yet. Instead, He watched closely as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. They had underestimated the impact of his bees. "This honey is changing the neighborhood," Marla continued. "Gardens are thriving, trees are healthier, people are happier." The president slammed his hand on the table. "We didn't approve any beekeeping projects. There are liability issues, insurance concerns. We need to find whoever is responsible." Caleb suppressed a grin. They wanted a target. They wanted to control the narrative. After the meeting, Caleb slipped out, blending into the crowd, the buzz of whispers following behind him. Word of the honey's success spread beyond the HOA. Local farmers' markets began calling, requesting more stock. Garden clubs sent emails praising the improved pollination. Even local newspapers caught wind of the story, dubbing the honey the secret nectar of the suburbs. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled. They hired pest control experts who specialized in bee removal, dispatched drone surveys over rooftops, and posted warnings about unauthorized beehives. Caleb anticipated every move. He shifted hive locations with the precision of a chess master, always staying one step ahead. One evening, he sat on a rooftop overlooking the neighborhood, watching lights flicker on in rows of houses. Somewhere below, a family opened a jar of his honey, savoring the sweetness born from the very rebellion he had quietly nurtured. He thought back to the day his land was stolen, the bulldozers, the legal notices, the cold indifference. Now, those same rooftops housed his empire. The bees thrived in the hidden corners of the development, pollinating flowers, fruit trees, and even vegetables grown in community gardens. Residents began planting pollinator-friendly plants, unknowingly supporting Caleb's growing hive network. Even skeptics couldn't deny the change. But not everyone was pleased. At the next board meeting, the president unveiled a new resolution. All rooftop structures must be approved by the board, and unauthorized installations will be removed immediately. Caleb knew the battle lines were being drawn. That night, as he inspected his hives, beneath the stars, he felt the weight of the fight ahead. The HOA had taken his land, but he had taken something else: control, influence, and a voice that couldn't be silenced. The sweet sting of justice was only beginning. The discovery happened on a cold Tuesday morning. Jenna, a contractor hired for rooftop repairs, was halfway through replacing a damaged vent when she noticed movement inside a loose panel. Curious, she reached in, and suddenly the quiet rooftop air exploded with buzzing fury. Swarming bees poured out, wings thrumming like a thunderstorm. Panicked, Jenna stumbled back, waving her arms and shouting for help. Within minutes, the HOA's emergency response team was on the scene, donning protective gear and barricading the rooftop. The news spread fast. The mysterious rooftop bees were no longer a rumor. They were a full-blown crisis. At the next HOA board meeting, the atmosphere was electric, with fear and outrage. "They're a danger," one resident declared. "What if someone is allergic? What if the bees attack children?" The president nodded grimly. "We need to remove all unauthorized hives immediately." But the board was in a bind. They had no idea who was behind the bees, or how to get rid of them without harming the community's sudden ecological revival. Then, a calm voice interrupted. "I can help." All eyes turned to the back of the room, where a man in a faded jacket and a thick beard stepped forward. It was Caleb, disguised but unmistakable in his quiet confidence. "I'm an experienced beekeeper," he explained. "If you let me, I'll safely remove the hives and relocate the bees without damage." The room was stunned. The very man who had been quietly defying them was now offering a solution. The board hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. For days, Caleb worked under watchful eyes, appearing at dawn with his tools and smoke, carefully extracting bees from vents, planters, and hidden nooks. He relocated them to safe rooftop hives he'd prepared in secret. But this was no simple removal. It was a strategic repositioning. With each hive, Caleb installed in new secure locations. The bees flourished, and the neighborhood's gardens grew even more vibrant. Word leaked that the beekeeper was no ordinary contractor. Rumors swirled about a former farmer whose land had been taken by the HOA. Some residents began to sympathize. At a community event, Caleb was approached by Marla, the finance chairwoman. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, "but your bees have changed this place. Maybe the HOA should be grateful." Caleb smiled wryly. Gratitude is a funny thing. But not everyone was convinced. The HOA president saw Caleb as a threat, a wild card undermining their control. The tension simmered beneath the surface. One evening, as Caleb inspected a hive perched on the community center roof, he found a note tucked beneath the cover. "Stop, or we'll shut you down." The warning was clear and chilling. Caleb understood then that this was no longer just about bees. It was a battle of wills. With the queen bee at the heart of each hive, Caleb's mission became a metaphor. Just as the queen commands the colony, Caleb was the unseen leader of a rebellion, growing stronger with every passing day. He looked out, over the rooftops bathed in moonlight, the faint hum of bees, a steady rhythm beneath the stars. They thought they could chase him away, but Caleb was already inside their walls. And this game, the Queen's Gambit, was just beginning. The HOA boardroom was a battlefield. But tonight, the weapons were jars of honey and veiled smiles. Caleb Martin sat at the edge of the polished conference table, his beekeeper's veil tucked into his jacket pocket, his eyes calm but sharp. The board members eyed him like a wild animal in a cage. Half suspicion, half grudging respect. "Mr. Martin," the HOA president began, clearing his throat, "we appreciate your expertise. However, the presence of these unauthorized hives has caused quite a stir among residents. Allergies, lawsuits." Caleb held up a jar of honey. The same residents who praise this honey at every market. The same ones who've seen their gardens and fruit trees thrive. Marla nodded in agreement. "Our lawns have never looked better. Neighbors are planting more flowers to support pollinators. There's real community buzz. No pun intended." The president scowled but couldn't deny the truth. The neighborhood was changing, flourishing. Caleb's bees had become an unspoken force, pollinating not just flowers, but goodwill. "Here's the catch," Caleb continued, voice low but firm. "I propose an official beekeeping program. Rooftop apiaries managed responsibly, with community involvement." The board exchanged uneasy glances. It was unprecedented. They had spent months fighting the bees, trying to eradicate them. Now they were being asked to embrace them. Caleb laid out his plan: hive maintenance, public education, allergy protocols, and a small fund to support neighborhood gardens. In return, the HOA could market itself as eco-friendly, a rare badge of honor for a suburban community. The room was silent. Then Marla spoke up. "It could improve property values." The president sighed, leaning back. "Fine, but there's one condition." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You sign a non-disclosure agreement. No talking about how this started. No mentioning the legal battles or land disputes. We clean the slate." A trap, Caleb knew, but it was a start. He nodded slowly. "I agree, but on one condition of my own." The room leaned in. A legal clause to recognize legacy landowners who lost property unfairly. To protect families like mine. The room stiffened. "Why should we?" the president asked. "Because it's the right thing to do," Caleb said. and because the community deserves transparency and fairness. After a tense pause, the board agreed to add the clause, quietly behind closed doors. Caleb had turned the tables without firing a shot. The next morning, local news ran a feature on the HOA's new environmental initiative. The beekeeper was named the program's ambassador. Caleb smiled as he read the headline, "Suburbia's Sweet Revolution." Behind the scenes, his bees buzzed on rooftops, untouched and thriving. But Caleb wasn't naive. He knew the agreement was fragile. A house of cards balanced on political will and public opinion. That night, as he tended to the queen hive atop the community centre, he found fresh scratches on the wood, a warning, unmistakable. Someone wanted him out. Caleb smirked. "They're getting nervous." He looked out over the twinkling homes below. The bees hum a quiet anthem. The game was far from over. Smoke and mirrors could hide many things. But Caleb's hive was real, and it was only growing. The atmosphere in the HOA boardroom had shifted from cold hostility to uneasy truce. But Caleb Martin knew better than to trust it. The quiet smile on the HOA president's face was a mask, hiding a venom as sharp as a bee's sting. The new agreement was signed. Caleb's bees would stay. The program would be official. And the legacy clause tucked quietly into the HOA's bylaws. But beneath the formalities lurked the unspoken threat, the sting clause. Late one night, Caleb sat at his kitchen table, the small lamp casting long shadows over the papers he had just received from the HOA attorney. The sting clause was a new addition buried deep within the legalese, a loophole that allowed the HOA to revoke the beekeeping program at any sign of community disruption. Vague enough to be wielded like a weapon, it was a trap, designed to keep Caleb on a short leash. He tapped his pen against the paper, frustration rising. They had taken his land, tried to crush his spirit, and now tried to cage his bees. But Caleb wasn't done. The next morning, he visited Marla, the finance chairwoman who had become an unexpected ally. "Marla," Caleb said, sliding the papers across her desk, "this clause is poison. They want control without accountability." Marla sighed, flipping through the pages. "They're playing hardball. We need a counter-move," Caleb said. "Something to protect the bees and the people who care about them." Together, they devised a plan to rally community support. Caleb would host a series of educational workshops, teaching neighbors about the importance of bees, pollination, and sustainable living. They'd invite local schools, garden clubs, and environmental groups. If the community loved the bees, the HOA couldn't just pull the plug without backlash. Word spread fast. The workshops filled up. Parents brought children. Elderly couples rediscovered their gardens. The bees became more than a nuisance. They became a symbol of resilience. But the HOA board was restless. At the next meeting, the president proposed a new rule. All bee-related activities must be pre-approved and limited to certain areas. Caleb's allies pushed back hard. Marla stood up, voice steady. "The bees are a community asset, not a liability. We should be expanding, not restricting." The president glared, but relented, knowing public opinion was turning. One evening, as Caleb checked a hive on the community center roof, he found a new warning etched into the wooden frame. "Last chance." He pulled out his phone and called Marla. "They're trying to intimidate us," he said. "We're not backing down," she replied. But Caleb knew the stakes had escalated. This wasn't just about bees or land anymore. It was a war over freedom, community, and justice. As the sun set behind the rooftops, Caleb looked out over the neighborhood. The bees buzzed softly in the twilight. Their hum a steady heartbeat of defiance. The sting clause was meant to silence him. Instead, it sharpened his resolve. Because sometimes, the smallest sting can change everything. The final board meeting was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, whispers, and the quiet hum of countless bees hidden just above. Caleb Martin walked into the room with a calm certainty that belied the storm, brewing beneath the surface. Years of battle had led to this moment, a showdown, not just for bees or land, but for the soul of the community. The HOA president, eyes cold and calculating, opened the floor. We have before us a choice. Maintain order or embrace change. The so-called bee program has divided this neighborhood, but it's clear the community's voice is louder than any board decree. Murmurs echoed through the crowd. Caleb scanned the faces. Neighbors he'd once only seen from afar now stood with him, united. Caleb stepped forward. This isn't just about honey or hives. It's about reclaiming what was lost. Trust, community, and respect for the land we share. He unveiled a new proposal, one he'd quietly prepared over months. A cooperative agreement that recognized legacy landowners, protected rooftop apiaries, and expanded green spaces for pollinators and wildlife. A blueprint for a future where everyone, HOA, residents, and even Caleb, could thrive. The room erupted in applause. The president's face tightened, but he knew the tide had turned. Outside, the bees thrummed in unison, a hidden symphony of life and resistance. Caleb looked up at the rooftops, their new farmland, their empire in the sky. The community gardens blossomed like never before. Kids ran freely among wildflowers, and the sweet scent of honey drifted on the breeze. Caleb's stolen land was gone, but what he had built was stronger, a living legacy carved from rooftops and rebellion. As the meeting adjourned, Marla caught Caleb's eye and smiled. "You did it," he nodded, feeling the weight of the journey lift. "We did it." Because, in the end, it wasn't just the bees that had stung. It was the courage to fight back, to build something better. The rooftop empire was just the beginning.